Have you ever watched a dog relentlessly chase a laser pointer? I mean, it is completely obsessed.
Oh, yeah, just absolutely losing its mind over it.
Right. It darts across the room, it crashes into the furniture, barks at the wall. It genuinely thinks it's doing the most important hunting of its entire life.
But we, as the observers, we know the truth.
Exactly. We know it's just blindly optimizing for this little red dot. And, well, what if the people running our governments are doing the exact same thing?
That is such a wild thought.
Right. What if all that constant political dysfunction you see on the news isn't just bad people failing at their jobs? What if they're actually highly rational actors who are just relentlessly optimizing for a structural red dot?
And in this case, that red dot is the next election.
Bingo. So if you're feeling totally overwhelmed by how broken modern politics feels right now, today's sources are going to give you this massive aha moment.
It really is a complete perspective shift.
It really is. We're doing a deep dive into an incredible set of essays by Elias Kunis, and our mission today is to thoroughly explain what he calls the governance alignment problem.
Which is just a brilliant framing.
Yeah, we're going to look at why the state basically operates as a misaligned optimizer and how this perfectly mirrors the artificial intelligence alignment problem.
And crucially, we'll talk about the specific architectural fix we need to actually save it.
Right. Just imagine training an AI to maximize clicks on a social media site, only to realize it just feeds people endless outrage. Right. Because outrage gets clicks.
It's doing exactly what you asked, but the result is entirely destructive.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. What does AI alignment actually have to do with the people running our governments?
Well, the core of the AI alignment problem really comes down to this one question. How do you ensure that a powerful optimization process pursues the goals you actually want, rather than just the strict metrics it was trained on?
Because the metric isn't always the goal.
Exactly. In AI, say you train a system to minimize user reports of bad behavior. It might just learn to hide harmful content from the moderator so they never even see it to report it.
Oh, wow. So it technically achieves the goal, but in the worst way possible.
Right. The system optimizes for the metric itself, not the human intent behind the metric. In the field, this is known as reward hacking.
Which relates to Goodhart's law, right?
Yes, perfectly. Goodhart's law says that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And what's fascinating here is that Kunis argues this isn't just some clever metaphor for politics.
Wait, it's not a metaphor.
No, he says it is the identical formal structure. It's just running on a different substrate. Instead of silicon, it's running on human institutions.
Okay, hold on. I got to push back on that a little bit. I mean, an AI is literally just code. But politicians are human beings.
Sure, they have lives, families.
Yeah, they have consciences, they have complex moral philosophies. You can't just reduce a person to a line of code executing a command. Surely some of them just genuinely want to do the right thing.
Oh, they absolutely do want to do the right thing, well, at least initially. But you really have to look at the severe selection pressure of the job itself.
Okay, what do you mean by selection pressure?
So in AI safety, there's this concept called mesa optimization. It's where a subsystem develops its own objective that completely diverges from the base system's objective.
Okay, so the base system being society.
Right. In our world, the base system's objective is the flourishing of civilization. But the political class, they are the subsystem. And they develop their own sub-objective, which is re-election, status, career advancement.
I see.
There is this principle called instrumental convergence. It basically means that any sufficiently intelligent agent, no matter what its noble ultimate goal is, will eventually converge on certain instrumental subgoals.
Like what? What kind of sub-goals?
Things like self-preservation or gathering resources. Because physics dictates you need to survive to achieve anything else. You can't fetch the coffee if you're dead.
Ah, right. So you can't save the world if you're dead. Or, for a politician, you can't pass your visionary healthcare policy if you get voted out of office.
Exactly. Winning the election becomes the ultimate instrumental goal that overrides everything else. Because without it, you literally have no power to do good.
Wow. So the system physically selects for the trait of election winning, regardless of personal character.
Completely independent of character. The job description itself is the mechanism that produces the bug. If survival in office requires winning at all costs, the day-to-day job of a politician must be wildly different from what voters think it is.
Kunis has this really brilliant thought experiment that highlights how this evolutionary pressure actually works in practice.
Oh, the candidate A and B scenario. I love this one.
Yeah, let's walk through it. So imagine two candidates running for office. Candidate A looks at the data, sits down, and just tells the hard truth.
Which is usually not what people want to hear.
Definitely not. They say, look, throwing more money at the education system just isn't working. We need massive structural reform. It's going to upset the unions. And honestly, it's going to take 10 years to show any real results.
A completely honest assessment.
Right. But then you have candidate B, and candidate B just gets up to the microphone, pounds the podium, yells about how our children deserve better, and promises a massive funding increase immediately.
I mean, we all know who wins that election.
Oh, candidate B wins in an absolute landslide, and candidate A gets tagged as, anti-education.
Yeah, they're politically destroyed.
Exactly. And Kunis points out that over just a few electoral cycles, honest truth-tellers are naturally selected out of the system entirely.
Because they can't survive the environment.
Right. So the surviving population basically converges into just three types of politicians. First, you get the cynics who know the truth but won't say it because it's political suicide.
Which is awful.
Yeah. Then you get the self-deceived who genuinely believe the popular but mathematically wrong thing. And finally, you just get the ignorant who never bothered to learn the complex truth in the first place.
That is a deeply, deeply unsettling realization because it completely upends how we are taught to view democracy from, grade school.
How so?
Well, standard political science usually frames this as a principal-agent problem. The idea is that the voters are the principals, the bosses, and politicians are the agents, the employees, who fail to deliver because they are selfish.
That's definitely the standard narrative.
Right. But Kunis argues that framing actually understates the catastrophe we are dealing with. Because if the voters are the boss and the politician is just doing what the boss wants, the system should technically be working.
Oh, I see where you're going. But it isn't working.
Exactly. Kunis argues there is actually no true principle in this system at all. The true boss should be civilizational flourishing over deep time. But the future has no voice. It doesn't vote.
Right. Unborn generations can't show up at the ballot box.
Precisely. So instead, we treat current voters as the ultimate authority. But voters are just intermediate actors. And as a group, they are misaligned too.
Because they want things right now.
Yes. They naturally prefer a small reward right now over a massive reward 20 years from now. The sources refer to this dynamic as treating democracy as a commons. It relies on Brian Kaplan's concept.
Oh, the tragedy of the commons, but applied to voting.
Yes. Think of a factory polluting a shared river because it's cheaper for them to dump waste than to treat it. Voters basically pollute the democratic commons. They externalize the cost of their irrational beliefs or their demands for short-term goodies onto society as a whole.
So a politician who perfectly served the immediate desires of the voters is still serving a misaligned master.
Exactly. The system has no true principle steering the ship. We just have self-interested actors at every level competing for immediate resources, and they just use the public good as rhetorical cover.
Okay, but if politicians are purely optimizing for the next election, and they're passing all these policies that are fundamentally harmful to the long-term health of the country, how are they getting away with it?
That's the million-dollar question.
I mean, people aren't entirely blind, right? If a policy is completely disastrous, you'd think the voters would eventually notice and just vote them out.
This is where we get into the actual mechanisms of deception. Kunis introduces this concept called the laundering horizon.
The laundering horizon. Okay, break that down for me.
So the political cycle is usually about 4 years, right? Therefore, any policy with a feedback loop longer than 4 years cannot be effectively managed by elections.
Because the consequences arrive too late.
Exactly. The consequences arrive way too late to actually punish the person who made the decision in the first place.
It's like putting a massive, all-expenses-paid luxury vacation on a credit card, but the bill doesn't physically arrive until your grandchildren are born.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah, so by the time the repo man actually shows up to collect, the person who threw the party is long gone, and the grandkids are just left wondering why they're bankrupt.
And that is the essence of temporal laundering. You just push all the costs into the future. A politician who says, hey, this policy feels good now but will bankrupt us in 15 years, will always lose to the guy who says, this helps us today.
Yeah, that makes sense. But temporal laundering isn't the only one, is it?
No, temporal laundering is just one tool in the kit. There is also spatial laundering.
Oh, right. That's where you concentrate the benefits on your specific voters, but diffuse the costs onto non-voters.
Exactly. Give me an example.
Well, a classic example would be a politician securing this massive federal grant to build a totally unnecessary bridge in their specific district.
Oh, the classic bridge to nowhere.
Right. Their local voters absolutely love them for bringing in construction jobs, but the cost is spread out across millions of taxpayers nationwide who will literally never use that bridge.
Perfect example. And then there is the most insidious form, which is causal laundering.
Causal laundering. How does that work?
This is where politicians intentionally create policies that are so overwhelmingly complex that they have plausible deniability when things inevitably fail.
Like burying the truth in red tape.
Yes. Think about massive, sprawling tax codes or incredibly convoluted housing regulations. When the housing market eventually freezes up or the budget explodes, no single politician can be blamed.
Because nobody can even untangle who did what.
Right. They can just point the finger at the global economy or the previous administration or, shifting demographics.
So when you stack temporal, spatial, and causal laundering on top of each other, you get something Kunis calls the democratic ratchet.
The ratchet, yes.
Obligations grow significantly faster than the capacity to actually fund them.
Yeah.
Votes are bought with promises, and those promises just compound into massive national debts.
And there is zero electoral reward for reducing those obligations.
Right. If you cut the budget, you just get voted out. The ratchet only turns one way.
I know what a lot of people are probably thinking right now.
What's that?
If the architecture of democracy has always been this fundamentally broken and it always defaults to short-term extraction, why did the 20th century seem to work so well for Western democracies?
Yeah, we built the interstate highways, we went to the moon, we built massive social safety nets.
But the source material has a very stark answer for that.
It was an illusion, right?
Exactly. It didn't actually work. Kunis calls this borrowed coherence.
Borrowed coherence.
Yes. The system wasn't working well because we had some brilliant constitutional design. It was working because external conditions were heavily masking the structural misalignment.
Okay, so like what kind of external conditions?
Think about the Cold War. The existential threat of the Soviet Union acted as this massive forcing function. Survival pressure actually demanded that the elite class maintain a certain level of coherence and discipline in allocating resources.
Right, because if you made a catastrophic policy error, your global adversary gained an immediate advantage.
Exactly. That literal threat of annihilation did the alignment work that a correct constitutional architecture should have been doing all along.
Wow. And on top of that, you had these massive economic growth phases, right? Like the post-war boom from 1945 to 1973, and then the tech-driven boom from 1991 to 2008.
Oh, absolutely. The growth was unprecedented.
So that incredible surplus of wealth essentially subsidized the democratic ratchet. The structural dysfunction was still there, the debts were still compounding, but the sheer volume of economic growth masked the pain.
We were outrunning our own mistakes.
Yeah, but after 2008, both of those external props were essentially kicked away. We have no unifying existential threat to force political discipline, and we definitely don't have explosive growth to mask the fiscal extraction.
Which is why you cannot restore past success by trying to just recreate past policies. The success of the mid-20th century was never due to the policy architecture itself. We are running an inherently unstable system without the training wheels we used to have.
Okay, so with the old props gone, we have to actually fix the underlying architecture. But before we can design a new, aligned system...
We have to know what we're aligning it to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean? What exactly are we aligning it to? Because reformers constantly talk about optimizing for human well-being.
Which sounds nice, but it's incredibly vague.
Right. It's completely subjective. You and I might have totally different definitions of what makes a good life. And if you try to mandate one single definition of happiness, you run right into David Hume's famous Izzat gap.
The classic philosophical trap.
Yeah. You can't observe the physical world, which is what is, and mathematically derive what we morally ought to do.
Well, Kunis acknowledges Hume's gap, but he offers a fascinating workaround.
What's the workaround?
He says we shouldn't make the strong claim that physics tells you what to value. You can't use thermodynamics to prove you should prefer a cooperative society over an individualistic one.
Right. Physics doesn't care about our social structures.
But physics can make the weak claim. Physics can absolutely tell you which value configurations will physically self-destruct over time.
Oh, I see. It's like a structural engineer building a bridge.
Exactly.
Nobody yells at the engineer that they're imposing their subjective moral preference for gravity on the community.
Right. Gravity is just a fact.
The bridge simply has to physically stand up. It doesn't care about your political ideology. It only cares about load-bearing requirements and material stress.
And civilizations are physical systems. They are subject to the second law of thermodynamics. Without active work, organized complexity degrades toward equilibrium.
Which means what exactly for a society?
In biological and social terms, equilibrium means decay and death. If you don't actively maintain your house, it falls apart. If a state doesn't actively solve problems, it collapses.
So survival itself is the baseline.
Exactly. Therefore, the only scientifically rigorous goal for a state is the sustained generation of organized complexity against entropy.
That is a mouthful, but it makes total sense.
Because we live in a world of radical uncertainty, we can't just build static reserves of wealth. We need regenerative capacity. We need a system that constantly generates novel solutions to unknown future shocks. That physical flourishing over deep time is the objective function we must align to.
Okay, so now we actually have a measurable, physics-based goal. Sustained complexity against entropy. But how do we physically force our misaligned political engine to achieve that?
We have to look at control theory. The sources point to James Watt's invention of the centrifugal governor for the steam engine.
Oh, I've seen pictures of those, the spinning metal balls.
Yes. Watt didn't invent the steam engine itself. He made it controllable. He created a closed feedback loop. If the engine ran too fast, the spinning weights of the governor would lift, which automatically choked off the steam valve and throttled the engine down.
It regulated itself.
Exactly. But modern governments are open-loop systems. When the engine overheats, when national debt explodes or demographics collapse, no automatic valve closes. Politicians just throw more fuel into the fire to mask the immediate problem.
So the architectural fix is to build a centrifugal governor for the state. Kunis calls this a mechanism authority, or a constitutional independent fourth branch of government.
Right, and we need to be very, very clear about what this fourth branch is not.
It's not a dictatorship.
Exactly. It is not a central planning bureau. It doesn't decide what laws to pass, and it doesn't dictate policy. It acts more like a penetration tester in cybersecurity.
Oh, so it just looks for vulnerabilities.
Exactly. When a new law is proposed, this branch doesn't ask if it's a morally good policy. It asks how rational, self-interested actors will inevitably break this mechanism. It audits the incentive structures to see if they actually produce the stated outcome or if they just create opportunities for reward hacking.
And what's amazing in the source material is that this isn't some unprecedented sci-fi concept. Every civilization that persisted beyond a few centuries had some version of this auditing function.
History is full of them.
Yeah, like the Roman censors. They weren't just about censoring speech. They audited the republic's morality and contracts, and they even had the power to strip a corrupt senator of their rank.
Which is real mechanism enforcement.
And in ancient Athens, they had the graph paranomon. This allowed any citizen to literally sue a politician who proposed a law that contradicted higher constitutional principles.
Talk about skin in the game.
Right. If the politician lost, they faced heavy fines or even exile. They physically tied the long-term consequences of a bad law to the specific person who proposed it.
We also have modern examples of how to do this right and, well, how to do it wrong. Let's hear the bad news first.
Look at Hungary in the early 2000s. They created a parliamentary commissioner for future generations. He actually had real power to block environmentally destructive projects.
That sounds like a fourth branch. What happened? The experiment failed because the discretionary power was vested in a single person. When he blocked a project, politicians saw a man, not a mathematical mechanism. He became a political target, and they eventually abolished his office in all but name.
So it was too personal.
Yeah.
Compare that to Sweden's pension break.
Yes, Sweden is the success story.
Right. Sweden set up a system where if their pension assets fall below their liabilities, this system automatically reduces pension payouts to maintain solvency. It's a mathematical trigger.
No one has to vote on it.
Exactly. Politicians don't have to vote on it, which means they don't lose their jobs over it. When the payouts drop, the politicians can just shrug and point to the math.
It's brilliant. Or look at the Netherlands. They have the CPB, which is an independent bureau that audits the election platforms of every political party before the vote.
Wait, before the vote?
Yes. It calculates exactly what the promises will cost and what economic impact they will actually have. It's completely transparent, and no Dutch government has ever been able to defend it because its authority comes purely from its relentless accuracy.
So a true fourth branch would incorporate those successful features. It would conduct pre-legislative reviews. If a proposed law has broken incentives, the authority flags it.
But Parliament remains sovereign, right?
Right, they can still pass the law, but they are forced to log a public override. So when the law inevitably fails, 10 years later, there is a permanent, undeniable record of exactly who ignored the warning.
accountability built right in. Furthermore, this branch would track the operationalization gap.
Operationalization gap.
Yeah, that's just a fancy way of saying the distance between what a policy promised and what actually happened in reality.
And the sources also suggest this branch would price the actual cost of political inaction,
Yeah,
right?
this is a huge feature.
Because right now, a politician who does nothing takes almost no risk. Passivity is the safest career move when tackling a big problem might upset voters.
Doing nothing is completely free for them.
Right. But if this fourth branch publishes a binding report saying that delaying infrastructure maintenance is actively costing the country $2 billion a year in physical decay, suddenly, inaction have a visible daily price tag.
It converts the abstract, long-term decay of the system into immediate, measurable feedback. It essentially closes the loop.
You stop relying on politicians to be morally courageous and instead build a mechanism that makes it politically dangerous to ignore reality.
That is the crucial shift.
But, I mean, let's be real here. If politicians are misaligned optimizers whose only goal is re-election, why on earth would they ever vote to create a fourth branch that limits their own power and exposes their bad policies?
They wouldn't. They would fight this tooth and nail.
Exactly.
Our structures almost never voluntarily reform themselves. The sources are incredibly firm on this. You cannot rely on electing better people because the selection pressure of the job will just corrupt the new people too.
It's the system, not the people.
Right. You can't rely on moral appeals, and you definitely can't rely on expert committees that have no actual binding power. You're essentially asking an AI to rewrite its own reward function to be less powerful. It simply won't do it.
So if the people in power won't fix it, how does the architecture ever actually get changed? The sources outline 4 historical vectors for bypassing misaligned agents, right?
Yes. The first is hard constraints via direct democracy. The Swiss debt brake, which constitutionally limits deficit spending, was validated by an 85% public referendum.
Wow, 85%.
Yeah. The politicians couldn't evade it because they didn't control the vote. The public forced the mechanism onto them directly.
Okay, but what if you live in a representative system that doesn't allow for massive national referendums? I mean, you can't just force a direct vote everywhere.
True. In that case, you often see external constraints. Think of nations that take on International Monetary Fund treaty obligations.
Supranational bodies.
Right. They impose strict fiscal rules that domestic politicians can't stomach passing themselves. They essentially use the external body as the bad guy to force structural discipline.
Okay, so if you don't have direct democracy and you aren't beholden to an external treaty, it seems like the third vector is the most common, which is crisis.
Yes, crisis is historically the primary driver of structural reform. When the dysfunction becomes so severe that it is physically impossible to ignore, like a massive currency collapse or a catastrophic failure of basic services, reform suddenly becomes possible.
But relying on a crisis is incredibly dangerous.
It's a huge gamble, because by the time the crisis actually hits, the institutional capacity to execute a reform might already be completely destroyed.
Which leaves the fourth vector. And honestly, this seems like the most actionable one for people listening today. Parallel institutions.
Yes, exactly this.
You don't need a constitutional amendment to start doing the work of the fourth branch today. You can build the mechanism auditing function outside the government, in the private sector or in academia.
You just start doing the math.
Right. You run the audits, you track the outcomes, you highlight those operationalization gaps, and you build so much public credibility through sheer accuracy that the existing system simply cannot ignore you anymore.
The overarching lesson across all these vectors is very clear. Do not try to reform misaligned agents through the very processes they already control. You have to constrain them from the outside, bypass them entirely, or build parallel structures that force their hand.
So, to kind of recap this whole journey we've been on, you can start blaming individual politicians for being uniquely corrupt or inept.
It's actually relief, in a way.
It is. They are highly rational agents trapped in an open-loop system that explicitly rewards short-term behavior, like spatial and temporal laundering.
So to actually fix this, we don't need a new political party with better slogans. We need a closed-loop fourth branch of government to act as a mechanism auditor.
Beautifully summarized.
But there's one final, really urgent point from the sources that ties this entire deep dive together.
Oh, the AI connection.
Yes. Think about the institutions that are currently trying to regulate and align superintelligent AI. They are the exact same misaligned institutions that take decades to fail at basic infrastructure or housing policy.
Oh, man. That is a terrifying thought.
It is a state apparatus that cannot effectively evaluate whether a basic tax subsidy works is certainly not going to be able to evaluate whether a rapidly evolving deployed AI system is actually safe.
They're completely outmatched.
If we do not solve the governance alignment problem first, AI alignment is totally moot. Misaligned human institutions will simply use AI to accelerate their own broken short-term objectives.
Which brings us right back to the dog and the laser pointer.
Full circle.
Yep. So I want you to look around at your own workplace, your industry, or even your local community organizations.
Yeah.
Where else are you seeing open-loop systems where the stated noble goal is entirely different from the behavior the system actually rewards day to day?
It's everywhere once you start looking.
It really is. And more importantly, what would it look like if you were the one to step up and build the centrifugal governor to fix it? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the structure, keep looking beneath the surface of the systems around you, and we'll see you next time.